So for the advanced class, I prepared a few games, a bit more complicated than the end games we saw earlier. And this first game is against an international master, Keaton Kiewra. I played him in the Spice Cup Open last year, which is held in St. Louis. So I'm playing white. I play d4. This is what I normally play. And he played the King's Indian defense, which I believe he usually plays, or at least up until this game he did. Here he played this move c6, which is, it was pretty new for me. I've seen this move before, but I've never faced it in a real game. Normally he plays d6, the main King's Indian move, and then e5, and just the basic King's Indian we've all come to know and love, of course. But he played c6. And his idea here is to play d5 and to just completely challenge and mess with white's big center here. I play bishop e2. I figured this was the most natural move. He played d5. Then I played e5 and knight e4. It was pretty clear to me that he prepared this opening before the round because I think it was a morning round. We already knew our pairings for quite some time. And it's always a tricky thing when you're playing someone and you know they've prepared for you, like some specific opening, and you're not sure what kind of traps they have in mind. And you know they've worked with a computer. And I know Keaton, and I know he prepares openings all the time. So I was a bit nervous that I'm going to fall into some kind of opening trap here. But the only advice I can really give you guys is just try to play what you think are the most natural, logical moves, and you should turn out okay. So here after knight e4, I don't really want to take this knight because black is going to put a lot of pressure on my d-pawn here. So I can play like knight g5, trying to win this e4 pawn, and then after c5, white center is kind of collapsing here. I can't really push my d-pawn because e5 will hang, and yeah, so my center is falling apart, and my king is still in the center for the moment, so I really wouldn't be that happy here. Instead, I decided to just castle, letting him take on c3, and he took on c4. He played c5. So this was his idea here. He trades knights, and he forces my pawn to move up to this e5 square where it's kind of extended. And after these exchanges, he gets more pressure on my center. And now this isn't really a King's Indian anymore. It's kind of like a Grunfeld defense, where black has this nice bishop on g7, and the game is open. And they're ready to attack the center with like moves like knight c6, bishop g4, maybe queen a5 at some point. And white has to figure out a way to defend their center here. So if you guys want to suggest a move at any point, feel free. Like, what would you guys think about playing here to complete your development?
Bishop g5.
Yeah, that's a pretty logical move. I think this move is perfectly okay. Anything else? Okay, so white has a couple of options here. The move I played was rook e1, which I think is a pretty good move. I realized black wants to play bishop g4 next, and knight c6. And if I ever want to play my pawn to d5 to gain more space, then my e5 pawn will need protection, especially if their bishop is on g4 pinning my knight. So I figured rook e1 would have been a pretty good move. Another good move is just h3, just stopping the bishop from coming to g4. And I think this is what people mostly play in this opening today. We're still in like the opening theory stage. But I figured this move was kind of slow, and I would rather just develop my rook. And I didn't think that bishop g4 was a huge deal. So first he took on d4, and he played bishop g4. One thing I should mention actually is that if white played a move like d5, just trying to gain as much space as possible, this kind of strategy can really backfire if you can't defend these pawns adequately. Like for instance, black plays bishop g4, I'll play bishop f4, defending the e5 pawn, and knight d7. And white's pawns look very nice, but black's next move is going to be knight b6, attacking my bishop. And it's not so clear what white can do. I can never play e6 because black will take, and the bishop on f4 will hang. And d6 is a move I can also consider, but it's kind of risky. The further you push your pawn, the easier it is for your opponent to attack it and possibly win it. And also after d6, black can take, and probably the pawn on c3 is going to hang. So a position like this, at first glance, looks pretty good for white because you have these incredibly strong pawns in the center and all your pieces are in the center. But I think black is really happy here. Like rook e1, knight b6, and I'm not sure what to do with this bishop. If I play bishop b3, black will play c4 and win the pawn. And if I defend it with my queen, then black can always take on f3 and double my pawns, and that's not something that I really I'm going to be really happy with. So I wanted to mention that this move d5 looks good, but it's not as probably not as good as it looks. So I played rook e1. I just want to defend my center and keep everything under control. So he took. He played bishop g4. I played bishop b2. Knight c6. I pretty much more or less expected all this when I played rook e1. So here I prepared the move d5.
Excuse me.
Yeah, go for it.
It's an aggressive bishop move. Why don't you go with the h3 and attack the bishop immediately and drive him out?
If I play h3, he's going to take my knight. And here he can probably take this pawn. Right. But even if he couldn't take this pawn, I can always play a move like h3 in the future. I think it's kind of I think it's not very flexible. I did play this move, but only after a few more moves. And I also want to see if he's just going to take on f3 willingly, because sometimes players do that. They just want to take on f3 and for whatever reason maybe bring my queen out. So if I can induce him to play that without this move h3, then it's like I saved the move. But h3 is definitely a move to consider. But I played d5 there. That was a good question, though, because that's a very natural move to look at. I figured now d5 is OK to extend because all my pieces are developed and my center is supported quite nicely. And I'm also playing d5 with a tempo. I'm hitting his knight, so his knight can't get to like d7 and b6 real quick. So he plays knight i5 and bishop b3. Bishop f1 was also a good move, but I figured bishop b3 makes sense. I don't really mind if he takes my bishop because I'll develop my queen with a tempo, and then I can bring my rook to d1. And if I can hold on to the pawns in the center, then white should be pretty happy here. It should be a pretty nice advantage, because the central pawns are very strong when they're adequately defended. And this was kind of like the main theme in the game here, is that once these pawns are defended and supported well, they become really dangerous really fast. So my opponent played rook c8, good move. And here I played h3. I'm ready to develop my queen and connect rook, so I figured might as well play h3 here and see if he'll take on f3. Actually, I think black should play bishop d7 here. I think taking on f3 is a small mistake. And here the position is probably better for white, but it's not super clear. Black's pieces look a little awkward, but I think they're okay. Like rook c1, he'll trade. And a position like this, it's better for white, but close to equal. The point is that black keeps this light-squared bishop, and it's a very good piece. It controls a lot of squares. And even though white has more space in the center, black has this nice light-scored bishop, so it's not like white can really do a whole lot immediately. So I think that's what black should have done. Instead, he took on f3, and he played queen b6. I played rook d1, just the most natural move. And here he took on b3. So white has kind of a small decision to make here. They can either play queen takes b3 and allow a queen trade, or they can play a takes b3 and keep queens on the board. By a show of hands, who would trade queens here? Just one, yeah. Well, you're in the endgames lesson, so you probably feel pretty confident about your endgames play right now. That's fine. How about AB? Who's a fan of this move? You can also stay undecided. So you like this move, sure. Cool. Yeah, I played A takes B3. I think after queen takes B3, it's sort of like letting black off the hook a bit. Like they'll trade and they'll play rook D8, and I think black is okay here. I like my pawns in the center. I like that I can probably create a pass pawn in the future, but you know, black has their own counterplay. They can play rook C2, they can play rook C5, rook B5. Without queens, I can't really create any serious threats. With queens on the board, my pass D pawn is potentially more dangerous because I can also use my queen at some point to make threats. In an endgame, pass pawns are, they're blockaded, and it's not so easy to win, especially if they can blockade it with their king. In the middle game, black's never going to blockade my D pawn with their king. It would just be extremely dangerous. But here with the queen on, I can create more threats. So my opponent played the most natural move here. He just played rook C2. This is actually a pretty serious mistake. Better would have been something like queen B4. Black just needs to stay put here. They just really, they can't do a whole lot. If they try to get too much counterplay, they're just going to find themselves in serious trouble. And that's what happened here. He played rook C2, which looks so natural because the rook comes to the second rank, it attacks my bishop. It puts pressure on F2, which is kind of annoying. And maybe black is ready to double up on the C file and try to win this B3 pawn at some point. But after bishop A3, actually black is in huge trouble. There's just not a good way to defend the E7 pawn, which my opponent definitely underestimated. Not only is E7 hanging, but I'm also just starting to play D6, D7, and just queen this pawn. And black's rook on C2 is horribly misplaced. Right now, there are no threats on F2. Black has no counterplay with this rook. It's as if I'm playing with an extra rook in the center and just ready to promote these pawns. I think originally my opponent wanted to play rook C8 in this position. I mean, he's a good player. He wouldn't play rook C2 without thinking about what my reply is. Or maybe he was expecting bishop D4. But bishop A3, I think he wanted rook C8. With the point of, if I take on E7, he plays rook C3, and he's attacking my queen, he's attacking F2, and it looks kind of dangerous for white. But in reality, if you just stay calm and just sort of think about the position for a little while, you'll find that there's not that much danger here for white. So white actually has two really good ideas here. The first is to play rook E3. So one idea for black is to take this pawn on E5 because of the pin on the third rank. White can't take the bishop. And now black's bishop is super active and it's ready to come to D4 and cause a lot of grief to my position. But white has D6, and this pawn ends up just being the deciding factor. Black put both of the rooks, on C2 and C3, but after D6, I think white's just going to get a new queen. And black just doesn't have enough time to create enough threats. But it's pretty complicated. The other solution, which might be simpler, is just queen F4, just moving the queen. And black doesn't have time to take on B3 because I'm just going to play D6. My bishop on E7 is perfectly placed because it's controlling the queening square, and I'm going to promote my pawn soon. Here I was a little worried about this move bishop H6. And of course I can't take this bishop because the queen takes F2 check and mate on G2. But after just a simple move, queen F6, F2 is protected, and black is just lost. If we trade queens, then they don't have any serious threats, and white's D pawn is too strong, and the game is more or less decided. And otherwise, black just doesn't have a way to keep making threats. So during the game, it took me much longer than it should have to calculate all this. But I figured my opponent is high rated, and if he plays rook c8, probably it's going to be pretty dangerous. But things often look scary, and they're often not that scary, which is something you should remember. If your opponent is trying to intimidate you, that usually means he doesn't like his position very much. What you should do is just try to remain objective and just try to find the best moves without thinking about who your opponent is and whether they're going to mate you or not. You should just try to find the best move, look for good defenses. And here all this stuff looks kind of crazy. Queen f4, like bishop h6. This move really bothered me during the game because my opponent has this nice deflection tactic. But once I found queen f6, it's like, okay, there's nothing here, and I can just play this with confidence. So here my opponent took a long time, and you realize he doesn't have anything with rook c8. So we just played rook e8. And now I played d6. So my pawn is super strong. I'm threatening to play d7 and to take his e7 pawn with my bishop. And black here is in huge trouble. They're basically just lost already. For instance, if they take on d6, I'll take. Rook takes e1. And here I was, during the game, I was really worried about rook takes f2 at first, because if queen takes f2, he has bishop d4 winning the queen, right? But I have this intermediate move, rook check, and I win the game.
I have a question.
Yep.
Bishop d4, yeah, the one you just did. Bishop d4 doesn't work because you have rook e8 check and bishop d2. No, after rook f2. You can play queen f2 also.
Oh, I see what you mean.
You can check and play bishop d2.
Takes here, check, and yeah, we call that a cross pin. This also looks great, but yeah, I mean, I saw rook e8 check, so I thought that's probably good enough. There was another funny line here, but I don't remember what it is, so forget it. If black just stays passive and plays bishop f8, then e6 is very strong. If they take, I take with the rook, and I'm threatening d takes e7, and there's no defense. It's just black is just busted here. Another cool thing is if f5, just keeping the position kind of closed, I can just play g4. And if takes, I have queen f7 check. And I don't take the rook because I'll get mated on f2 and g2. But I can just take here. And the game is just over. So my opponent here played e6. And this is pretty simple now for white. I was able to just see all the way to the end of the game, which made me happy. When you're thinking you have a winning position, if you can calculate until like the very, very end of the game, or until your opponent just has to resign, it's always great. If you can calculate things out to the end, it's a lot better than just relying on your intuition. So d7, bishop e7, just winning the exchange. Bishop f8, takes, and queen f6. So can anyone see why my opponent resigned here? Yes?
Because they're incredibly lost.
Good way to put it.
One is bishop e7, queen e7.
Yeah, bishop e7, queen takes e7, and white wins. So I wanted to show you guys that game because I was really surprised after winning it, because it seemed like white really didn't do anything special. All I did was put my pieces in the center of the board, and then once things got a little complicated, like I was able to see all the tactics I needed to see and was confident enough to just go for this break. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the next game. So here, the opening and middle game weren't really interesting or instructive. It was kind of just us shuffling around a bit. So I just wanted to start from this position. Here, oddly enough, once we were down to like 2-3 minutes, the game got really exciting. And here I'm playing white. My opponent, I believe he's a master, or maybe high-rated expert. So what's going on here? Black is up a pawn. White has the 2 bishops. And both kings are kind of iffy. They're not very happy here. They're both kind of exposed. White's pieces are definitely better here. Like the queen on h5 is active, where the queen on e6 is kind of defending everything. The bishop on d4 is really nice because it controls all the dark squares on both sides of the board. And this bishop on d3 is also a really important piece because it's controlling this square on c2. So even though white's king looks kind of airy, it's practically impossible for black to create any threats because I'm controlling the c2 square. Black's bishop on b7 is not a very good piece. It's passive. It's not. It's just defending the pawn on d5. It's not really doing anything else. And the knight on e4 looks very good, but this knight actually gets in trouble, which is why I like this game, because I abuse this poor knight quite a bit in the game, and it's pretty interesting. Even though the knight is on e4 defending everything, as we'll see, it ends up being a problem piece for black. So I played a pretty risky move here. I played g4. I figured this was a very logical move because I want to open up this diagonal for my bishop. I want to open up the g file, and I want to try and attack black's king. Even though white's down a pawn here, they're really not. They're probably not in any danger of losing if they just stay put, because black's extra pawn is on d5 and it's thoroughly blockaded. There's really not a whole lot black can do here to improve their position. All they can do is also just stay put and try to defend everything. But of course I wanted to win, so I played g4. Black took, and I played rook g1 here. So here my opponent blundered with g3. He missed that I can just take this pawn with my rook because of the knight's pin. He should have played this funny move bishop c8, just defending this pawn. And I would probably play king g2, trying to play like rook h1 and create something against the h6 pawn. For instance, I want to play rook h1 and then like f5, attacking his queen. And things are pretty complicated. White's definitely risking a lot by giving up their g-pawn. But the game continues. You know, we both have 2 minutes. Like, someone's going to win. Hopefully it'll be me. I have the 2 bishops, so I feel pretty confident here because when you and your opponent both have low time, it's well known, it's better to have the initiative because you create threats and your opponent has to try and defend. And it's very stressful to defend against a lot of different threats. But as it happened, the practical aspect of this sort of just paid off immediately. You play g3 check, and he just blundered this pawn. So here he played bishop c8. He's trying to organize some kind of defense. Like if maybe you can play queen f5 here, he'll be pretty happy. White has a number of good ways to proceed here. I played this move, rook g5. I thought it was a cool move. I'm taking advantage of 2 pins, the h6 pawn and the e4 knight. And I'm going after black's d5 pawn, and maybe I want to play like rook e5 and rook e8 and checkmate black. But even stronger was actually f5. And the point of this move is to deflect black's queen. So if they take, I play queen e8. This is the whole idea, to give my queen access to the e8 square. And this position is like, in a lot of these positions, you'll see why the 2 bishops are so strong and such a commodity, is that white's king is just perfectly safe. The bishop is controlling the f2 square. This bishop is controlling this square. Black is pretty much lost here. You can take the rook. He has to give up his queen. And, well, with an extra queen, white should win this position pretty easily. Queen and bishop, I should say. I'm just going to take the queenside pawns, and the game's over. Another cool line was queen d6, attacking my rook on g3, which is now also pinned. But bishop takes e4, takes, and bishop e5. Just a nice deflection tactic. Of course, if queen takes, check, and mate. So this move f5 was very strong. But I didn't really see it. I didn't actually see this idea of queen takes f5 and queen e8. I figured with black's queen on f5, they probably have something against my king, like queen h5 check or something, but it doesn't, there is no queen h5 check. I just take. So I figured this was a good move. A lot of people say, like, when you see a good move, look for a better one. But like in time trouble, if you only have a minute left, if you see a good move and you know it's a good move, just play the good move because you have a minute left. Don't look for anything else. So rook g5. He played bishop b7. I played rook e5, queen f7. And here white has two options. Queen takes f7, rook takes, and bishop takes b6 with a very good endgame. I win back my pawn, and with two bishops and an active rook, I should win that endgame. Or queen h4, just keeping the queens on the board and continuing with your attack. So I'll ask you guys again, would you trade queens here or keep queens on the board?
Trade.
You would trade? Okay. Anyone else?
Yeah.
I'd trade.
Trade? Does anyone want to keep the queens on?
I would.
You're cool. Yeah, actually, I traded queens because I was pretty sure I could win that endgame, and I did. But keeping the queens on is probably just crushing. Because, again, black has no threats with any of their pieces, but white has all the threats in the world. Specifically, I just want to play f5 and rook g6, and then take this h6 pawn, for instance. There are some cool lines here, like knight g5, f6 check, and check, and it's going to be mate. Queen takes, f7 check, and white wins. Or rook c7 and rook e6 and queen h5 and queen's coming in to g6, and the game is basically over. But I made a practical decision here because I figured with low time, I'd rather just play a really good endgame rather than play a complicated position where I might blunder something. But now looking at it, like it's a pretty serious mistake, I think, to trade queens. Because after queen h4, practically speaking, there's no way black can hold this position. And if white just plays f5, rook e6 next, it's pretty much game over. So white traded, and then I took this b6 pawn. He played a4. I played bishop c2, attacking the pawn. Bishop c6. Of course, rook takes f4, loses because of check and takes. And miraculously, my bishop on b6 protects the f2 square, so black can't play rook f2 check, winning the piece back. And this game, I really like this game. It just shows the power of the two bishops so well. The bishops they control everything. And my opponent actually was just getting frustrated over not being able to really do anything here with any of his pieces, while my bishops just dominated the board. And again, this knight on e4 is in the center, but it's pinned, and it can't do anything. So he played bishop c6. I played rook e6, bishop d7, and rook d6. So the knight can't take, and black loses their d5 pawn. He played king g7. I took knight f6. And what move should white play here? Exactly. Yeah, just pin the knight all over again. Don't give black any freedom, and black's system is just losing here. At the very least, I'm going to win this a4 pawn, and then I'll have two pawns. But he played rook e7, and I played rook d6. I pretty much calculated this out now because it wasn't too hard. Rook e2 check. He takes one of my bishops. I take here. King g6 is the only move to keep the knight protected, and then of course rook d6. So the whole game, this knight, has just been under attack, and now it's lost, and the game is just over. Okay, so I'm playing white again, and my opponent here is Alex Ostrowski. He's a FIDE Master. He's very good. He'll probably be an IM or GM in the next 2 years or something. I was playing him in, I think, an open tournament. We reached this position. As you can see, it's pretty complicated. My king is on f1, but black's king is also not that safe. And he just played this move knight d3, which is a really, really tricky move. And you should also know that he played this move with like a minute left on his clock. And I had about an hour left. He spent a bunch of time in the opening and middle game, so I had this huge time advantage. And then he played this move knight d3. And I thought I was just winning here. I thought rook takes d3. He takes. Queen e5 check. If king c8, I have bishop g4 check. So I give check, another check, check, and I win the queen. So I figured, he's got a minute left. He played the first move he could see that didn't blunder anything immediately. So I'm just winning here. But things are, of course, not so simple. If that was it, I wouldn't be showing this game, of course, if it was just one combination. The problem is after rook takes d3 and check, black can just take this knight. I take, d takes e2, I take, rook e8 check, and white gets mated in the center of the board. King f1, rook d1. So as you can probably imagine, this rattled me quite a bit. But it's a really good practical lesson, is that you should never assume things are simple, because they're usually not. So my opponent plays this move, and he sets this it's a pretty nasty trap. And of course, things are now okay for black. Like, black is not in any kind of trouble at all. Of course, if I play bishop takes d3, he can play rook takes d5. And white's rook on h1 is out of play, so I'm in pretty big trouble here. Check, bishop e2, and clearly white's not happy at all. Black's king is perfectly safe. I'm losing all my queenside pawns, and yeah, it's bad news. So I was able to find this move knight e3, which is a good move because basically it doesn't blunder the game away, and sort of everything's protected now. He took this pawn, I took on b5, and he takes the pawn on b2 with this knight. Queen takes b2 is also possible, but I'll just take on c4, and I play queen f4. And this knight is pinned, and I think white's doing pretty good here. My king is safe because all my pieces are around it, and I'm threatening rook takes h6, and I'm also threatening rook h5. So white's doing pretty good here, but probably this was the best that black could do. He ended up taking this pawn with his knight, which is probably a mistake. And I played bishop f3. So this is a pretty good move, but it requires me to see a lot of tactics and a lot of tactical nuances and little details about the position, and some of my opponent's resources too. So the bishop on b7 is hanging with mate. Black doesn't have time to take the rook on d1. They basically have two moves here, queen b3 and queen a6. So queen a6, I should take the rook, and I cannot take this knight on b2 because of c3 check. At first it looks like I have queen e2 defending everything, but here comes a blow, rook d1 check. And I saw something like this during the game, and of course it freaked me out. So the point is knight takes d1, c2. And if I take on a6, bishop recaptures, gives check to my king, and black queens and wins the game. So that is pretty terrible. But what I noticed, luckily, is that I have queen e5 check, king a8, and then queen takes b2. And now in the same line, the big difference is that black's king is on a8, And after rook d1, knight takes c2, queen takes a6. The bishop's pinned, he can't take on a6. And white wins. So this was really important detail to spot, queen e5 check, because you always want to pay attention to your opponent's resources, especially their tactical resources. Because if you miss one move, you can lose the game on the spot. And of course, my opponent here still has 1 minute left. I'm down to maybe 30 minutes. You know, I want to just play fast and try to flag him or try to make him blunder something. But he's so strong tactically that if I miss something like rook d1 check, you know, I could just lose the game immediately, and that would be pretty bad. So as it happened, he played queen b3. And here I played queen e5 check and knight d5. So my knight gets really active, and I'm threatening knight c7 check, which is pretty devastating. So he doesn't have time to take the rook on d1, because it's our favorite smothered mate. But on the queen side, which you don't see too often. But of course, you also have to notice some other things about the position. In a lot of these lines, basically this rook on h8 just ends up hanging. Like black would love to just take this knight on d5. But they can't. Like bishop takes, I'll take with a check, and you know, I can take either rook here, but I mean, this is just simple. And of course, rook e8 is never possible because of knight c7 check. Even if I didn't have the smothered mate idea, knight c7 check always is always there for white. So a6, great move. He gets the square on a7 for his king. Rook a1, I figured I'll put my rook here, and I'm threatening knight c7 check and maybe some more tricks along the a file against this king. But the position remains pretty complicated because my king is also not that comfortable, and my rook on h1 just isn't in the game. If my rook was on b1, for instance, then probably black could just resign because I would have too many threats with my rooks there. So you play knight a4, blocking the a file, and I play king g1. So my idea is just to play king h2, rook b1, and that's it. Like, I have some possible ways to win the game here. I'm not sure if any of them work. One idea is just to play rook takes a4. And if queen takes, knight b6 check wins the queen. But black has queen b1 check. And my king has to come up. Or if I play queen e1, then black can trade queens and my knight on d5 is hanging. So instead of looking for something concrete, in this position, I just figured that, well, if my rook is on b1, obviously white will be winning. Black won't have any defense to the threats against their king. So king g1 must be a great move. And I mean, it works out well for white. You play queen b2. Black would love to trade queens here and ease some of the pressure. I gave check. I gave check again. And I played, can anyone guess what I played here? Knight b5, his queen's on b7, or b2, sorry. Well, I know you know. Sorry, what's that? Yeah, perfect. It's king h2, rook comes to b1, and yeah, the game is just over. I really like this game because it's, I don't know, I feel like I'm making all these strange attacking moves, but there's a certain kind of logic to them, and everything kind of works out pretty rationally. He played rook d3, queen c5, king b8. And of course, I can just take this pawn on a6, and takes, and rook takes, and this should be winning, of course, because black's king is just too exposed. But like, I figured I have to complete my idea, rook b1. I just figured, like, it just doesn't matter. Like, obviously this is winning too. So, and here, of course, my opponent resigned, which is great. If he played on, it would kind of be an injustice of sorts. I just want to finish in this exact position.